Well, greetings and welcome to another 1615 webinar. I am Matthew Ellison, president of 1615. Really happy you're with us today. Today's webinar is entitled The Innovation Crisis, Creating Disruptive Influence in the Ministry You Lead. Today's subject matter expert is a good friend of mine and a ministry partner, Ted Esler, the president of Missio Nexus, and the author of the new book, Innovation Crisis. The content he's going to be sharing is going to be drawn out of that new publication. So in just a moment, I'm going to hand the controls over to Ted, but first, just a few details for our viewing audience. Your phones are muted to preserve sound quality. So you can listen through your computer speakers or you can call in on the telephone. Now, as questions come to mind today, and let me emphasize that, we hope they do come to mind, we want you to type them in the question and answer panel located in the GoToWebinar task panel on the upper right-hand side of your screen. We're going to take the last 15 or 20 minutes of our time together to address your questions, and this is your opportunity to enter into the conversation with Ted. 85 people have registered for today's webinar. I want to remind everyone this webinar is being recorded, so as you view it, if you find the content interesting and informative, please pass it along to others. It will be available for viewing within a week. So Ted, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. Give me just a minute. I'm going to hand the controls over to Ted, folks, and we're going to get started. So Ted, take it away, my brother.
All right. Are we here and can you see my screen, Matthew?
We're great. We're ready to go.
All right, super. Hey, thanks everybody. Innovation in ministry to me is a really important topic, and I'm so thrilled to be with you and to be able to talk to you about this. Thanks to Matthew for inviting me. Let me just open with a word of prayer if I could. Heavenly Father, thank you so much that you are about creativity. From the very first verses of the Bible, you present yourself as creator. And Jesus, being so innovative, Lord, what a model for us. Help us as we think about what this means for us as we do ministry, and to not just see this as the domain of the business world, Lord, but to really understand that innovation is part of great leadership. Thank you, Lord, and we just pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, hi, I am Ted Esler, and this is the book that I just put out, The Innovation Crisis. I'm going to have a few preliminary comments, and then for the sake of time, I'm going to jump into just one chapter of the book. But I want to start with a quick explanation on why the name The Innovation Crisis, because that answers the question, why the book? In my role, so I lead Missio Nexus. It's an association of churches and mission agencies, represents about 60,000 missionaries globally dispersed all around the world. And in my role, I get asked, Ted, what are the most innovative organizations or ministries or churches or church mission programs out there that we could look to if we want some inspiration for innovation? And as I was asked that question over and over, I began to realize that my list was really short of things, of ministries that I would say, go look at this one. And I began to look at the fact that most of us do ministry the way everybody else does ministry. There's not a lot of, incredible innovation going on out there, almost to the point where I'd say it's a crisis for us. In ministry, we don't compete against other ministries. This is a big difference between us and the business world. In the business world, competition forces a lot of innovation. We innovate in competition with culture and innovation. So when we talk about the world, we're often talking about culture, and our culture is rapidly changing. And if we don't innovate, we won't keep up, and that worldly competition is going to get rid of us in the long run. Not really, because we know the Lord is superintending these things, but that's kind of the idea as to why innovation is so important. I could point out, I could spend all of our time, in fact, a day, talking about the innovation in Jesus' ministry, but we don't have time for that. So I just kind of want to roll forward a little bit and talk about who the innovators are in our world today. Who is innovative? And then we're going to talk about this thing called the innovation taxonomy, which is a way of thinking about innovative ideas. So quick little exercise, mental exercise. Think in your mind for me really quickly. Who are the most innovative entities that spring to your mind right now? I'll give you just a second or two. Mentally list them off. All right. I've done this exercise with many, many people now, large groups, small groups, you name it. I'm going to tell you what always comes to the forefront are these folks right here, our friends at Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. You could probably throw Elon Musk on there as he's becoming more and more popular as an innovator as well. Notice that there are no churches listed here and no ministries listed here. When we think about innovation, it's easy for us to just think, oh, well, that's the domain of the business world. But as I mentioned earlier, we have a very innovative author and perfecter of our faith. Jesus was very innovative. If you walked around in the first century and we're heading down the street talking to a couple of your friends, and one of them said, man, who are the innovators in our culture? Somebody is definitely going to say, that guy from Nazareth, man. Every time he opens his mouth, he says something shocking and provocative and innovative. You think about it. A new commandment I give you. A new kingdom, new wineskins, a new covenant. All of these things are examples of innovation. And it's not just Jesus. It didn't stop with Jesus, of course. It goes past Jesus. In the book of Acts, we got bridging the Greek-Hebrew divide. That was worldview exploding. It was so innovative. You've got the house church structure, tent making, the missionary team. I typically, when I have 5 or 6 hours to teach, we spend a lot of time on Jesus, the innovator, the first century church as the innovator. And then historically, you can look at the church. There's an awesome book about the invention of childhood. Do you realize that before there was Christianity, there really was no concept in the culture of childhood? You went from being a little kid in your home to being taken care of to working in the world. A lot of times at the age of 6, 7, or 8, you were out there. That's how brutal the ancient world was. And it was, in fact, Christians that came along and introduced the concept of childhood. Lots of things we could point to here. Universal civil rights, medicine, hospitals, healthcare in general, even the university system. Hard for us to believe today that that's the way it was, but almost all the big universities that we know of today were founded by Christians. So who is innovative today? It's an important question. I think maybe who should be innovative, I think it's the church. I think it's us in ministry leadership that should be innovative. Now, let's zoom out here for just a second of big picture talk. In my book, I have one chapter dedicated to what I call the innovation taxonomy. And the innovation taxonomy it's kind of an innovation. So let me define innovation. Innovation is the creation of something totally new or the recombination of existing items to create something new. So it's either totally new idea, that tends to be more the creativity piece, or it's the recombination of items into something new. Now, the taxonomy that I'm going to show you is really a recombination of something. There's an innovator's taxonomy that the business world has been using for over a decade. And I took those ideas and I combined them with innovation concepts in ministry to produce a taxonomy, or it's like a chart that can give you ideas about how to innovate in your own ministry context. So I'm going to skip over scads and scads of material that is in my book because of our time constraint. And I want to just jump straight to chapter 7, which talks about this taxonomy. What I'm hoping is that in this process, it will shake loose for you a couple of ideas upon which you might build innovation. If you want to learn how to do that, you got to read the whole book. But this is really focused more on thinking about how innovation might happen in your context. I'm going to try to give you some ideas on how it's happened in other ministries. So this taxonomy starts out really addressing 3 categories that you can look at. And those categories are pretty simple: outcomes, who does the ministry serve? Service, what does the ministry do? In organization, how is the ministry organized? So who, what, and how are the ways that we are going to look at innovation today. And again, I'll give you examples for each one of these. So let's just dive into it. Each one of these three have in turn three areas that I'll talk through. That's our outline pretty much for the rest of our time. So first of all, let's talk about outcomes. Who does the ministry serve? Here we have stakeholders, collaboration, and evaluation. Well, what do I mean by this? Let's talk first about stakeholders and how thinking about stakeholders can influence or affect how you innovate. Who does your ministry serve? A great example of questioning who our ministry serves comes from a church based out of Oklahoma City. Now, the day that the iTunes App Store on the iPhone debuted, there were 200 applications available for download. 200, hard to believe because I don't know where we're at now, but it's a lot. And among that 200 was a Bible app, and that Bible app was produced by Life Church. Now, I want to think of yourself in the elder board meeting, maybe going over the budget at Life Church TV way back in the early days when the iPhone had just come out, and think about what that conversation looked like when somebody said, hey, we are going to work on a Bible app. Now, this is 2007. Somebody might say, a what? You say, an app. What's an app? An app's a small program that runs on your phone. You pull out your flip phone and you say, a phone? And you say, yeah, a phone. I don't get it. Well, trust me, this is going to be something that takes over the whole world in a few years, and we want to be there first with the Bible app. And the question might be, well, how does that serve our congregation? Now, that's a stakeholder question. Who is the church there to serve? And one way to be innovative is to rethink who those stakeholders are. In this case, Life Church decided that they were going to change who their stakeholders were. They were going to innovate on that and take a gamble that the iPhone App Store would project the Bible out to what has become millions and millions, actually billions of people. That's a good example of stakeholder innovation. And we all have the opportunity to innovate in the area of stakeholder innovation in our ministries by rethinking who it is who we serve. And I think churches have a particular challenge here in trying to get the balance right between serving a congregation or serving those outside the walls of the church. Even in the missions arena, we see this as a challenge. Is your church there to reach the unreached? Are they your stakeholder? Or is it the people that come each Sunday morning? Obviously, that's a balance, but this is an area where there's some potential of stakeholder innovation. All right, so that's the first one we're going to look at. How about collaboration? What does collaborative innovation look like? Again, there's a great sermon we could give here on collaboration, reciting and remembering the fact that in Jesus' waning hours, it was unity that he prayed for us. And collaboration is a tough one. You know, as a missions leader, I often get asked by church leaders, how well do missionaries collaborate? And I always like to be maybe a little bit cheeky and kind of respond with, yeah, probably about the same level that you're collaborating with the churches down the street from you. And this is a challenge for us. Okay, I don't care who you are. It's always easier to think of somebody else as doing well in the collaboration area. But let me just say that this is an area where technology has transformed our abilities in amazing ways. I'll give you a ministry collaboration concept that's come out in the last few years. You know, Bible translation often takes decades just to do one Bible translation in one new language group. Well, some years ago, somebody had the idea, well, what if we got highly educated, bilingual people, and we put them in a hotel for a week, and we locked them up in a hotel, provided them with all their meals, maybe 200 people. And then we divided up the New Testament and sent it out to teams of translators in the hotel and asked them all to, within the space of a week, do a portion of the New Testament. And through collaboration, we'll do an entire New Testament in the scope of a week. Well, they've been trying that and using that. And what it does, it produces a very interesting first draft. Now, it requires some work for professional translators to go through again and look at, etc. But that's a great example of collaboration. And let me just say that there's probably no entity on earth that has more opportunity to collaborate and do amazing things than the church. We are probably the largest distributed network in the world, probably touching more cultures than any other social construct that's out there. And collaboration is an area very ripe for us to do innovation in and around. So that's collaboration. What areas can you work with others on to solve? By the way, collaboration is the key to large-scale problems, addressing large-scale problems. You're not going to, for example, reach the world through Christ on your own. That's going to be a collaborative effort. More could be said on that, but that's collaboration. All right. The final one there, evaluation. Define, understand, and evaluate ministry goals. What is it that you're trying to do in your ministry in terms of evaluation? And again, this one has particular challenges for us. We often think in terms of people and budgets when we do ministry evaluation. First question I ever hear two pastors ask each other, if it's not the first one, it's coming up pretty soon thereafter. How many people go to your church? Okay, so that's a count of people. And then budgets is a big one in the nonprofit world. How much money do you process in a year? Well, evaluation provides some incredible openings for innovation. A great example of that is in the whole movements arena. Church planting movements have asked the question, not can we go in and plant a church, but what if we planted a network of churches right from the beginning? You ask yourself different questions and you evaluate yourself differently if you're going in to plant one church versus if you're going in to plant 10 or 15. And evaluation works in mission sending. What are we trying to do here? Are we trying to reach the UPG? Are we trying to just send? Are we trying to just fund? What's our evaluation for success? And so this is a great one for being rich in innovation. All right, that's the whole outcomes arena. Let's move over into the service space. Now this is getting into what does our ministry do? So the first one has to do with experience, and I can point to a historic example of this in the church. Whether you like it or not, the church growth movement was a very influential movement in the United States and around the world, I'd say. And a lot of it was based on understanding the perspective of the non-believer when they walked into a church. What was their experience like when they came into contact with your congregation? And when you change how people experience your ministry, you communicate through your culture and through your acts. Maybe it's hospitality. It could be a lot of different things that go into this one. But this is a very key and important topic for us to think through deeply if we lead any kind of a ministry and ripe for innovation. The next one is identity, how your ministry is perceived by others. Now, I think evangelicals are doing a lot of hand-wringing these days about this identity issue because of the mix of politics and the evangelical identity. Let me give you an example of a ministry that changed its identity, and that change opened up doors of opportunity for them. So there used to be an association called the Association of Gospel Rescue Missions. And it's very much needed association, and you all know about rescue missions. They're scattered all across the United States, but the perspective in people's mind about them, it conjures up a certain type of ministry. And as they began to look at what they did and who they were as an association of rescue missions, they realized that in many cities, they were providing the key social services that those cities needed to serve their poor and underserved communities. And then they realized that people in those places looked at them not as a resource, but as a possible hindrance to delivering citywide social services, and it was wrapped up in their identity as rescue missions. They didn't realize that these rescue missions were doing everything from job training to literacy to personal development, you name it, to help these people raise the bar on their lifestyle. Now, at the same time, they were unabashedly Christian and they were sharing Christ, but they decided, let's change our name to City Gate Network, and they did that. And they began to communicate about the wide range of life-transforming services that they were providing. All of a sudden, local governments were contacting these groups and saying, hey, we have this issue. Is it something you could help us on? And it was because the identity or the perception of that ministry was changed within the people that they were trying to serve, namely those local communities, urban centers. I could give you 5 or 6 more, but because of time, I'm going to move on. But identity is an important area for us to be considering in ministry leadership. Relevance is the last one on the service area. Again, a very important one. It has to do with how culturally palatable your message is to the culture that you're trying to serve. Now, Jesus was a master at this. Jesus did 2 things at the same time when he taught, 2 things that are very difficult for us to do. One thing he did is when he spoke, people heard him and they understood that he was speaking in a very Jewish context, in a very Jewish way. He felt like, comfortable pair of jeans. They knew exactly what he was talking about. His illustrations and everything came right from the fabric of that culture. At the same time, he was doing an opposing thing. He was challenging that culture and basically saying, no, that's not how it should be. It should be like this instead. And that's the trick here when it comes to relevance, is to be able to communicate in such a way that people feel that it's coming and emanating from the culture, while at the same time it's showing how that cultural system opposes the kingdom. N.T. Wright calls that the double movement. I like to call it retro-revolutionary theology. But this is, all about this concept of relevancy in making your message palatable. Because of time, I'm not going to go on an example here, but I will just say another way that this has been considered is to make the culture more acceptable to your message that you might have. We tend to say that we shouldn't be changing the culture if we're missionaries, but sometimes that does happen in a very purposeful and powerful way. For example, if you're working in a people group in which the people would say, well, there's no such thing as a person who's a Christian from our culture because we're all, Muslim or we're all Buddhist. Well, if your ministry is able to highlight the lives of some Christians that are from that culture, you can actually change that cultural paradigm and make the culture more readily agreeable to your message. So it works in a couple of different ways. So these are the service areas: experience, identity, and relevance. The last set we'll look at here is organization. These tend to be the low-hanging fruit pieces, the ones that are easiest for us to do because they tend to be more internal to us as ministries and how we operate. So the first one here is economic engine, how expenses are paid for or eliminated. In the missions world, we experienced a revolution in this one with economic engine that started in about 1890. Now, before that time, if you wanted to serve cross-culturally as a missionary, your only option was to either go as a tent maker, fully self-supported, or to be a missionary from a denominational agency that paid salaries. But starting in the late 1800s, this concept of personal support raising came about, and it really was the fuel that created the ability for thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to be sent since that time. That's an innovation on economic engine that really changed drastically who went as a missionary. There's a lot of ways that we can think about how ministry is paid for. I talked about Life Church TV before. One of the things that they do is they have a whole team that creates tech tools that, for example, they put churches online virtually, and those tools are given away for free. They make no money from those. Part of their ministry is, their economic engine is, we're not going to derive revenue for our ministry from this particular service. So sometimes economic engine just means we're going to rely more on donations. Other times it means we're going to look at non-donation income as a means for supplying the needs in this area. Now, in the whole world of relief and development, where for decades we've sent hordes and hordes of money over, one innovation that's come about recently is the concept of trying to find the resources from within the community that you're serving. These are all innovations on economic engine, and they provide lots of ways for us to think about ministry in different and innovative ways. By the way, think about Life Church. They have those free tools to put churches online, and then COVID hit. Boy, they had a lot of customers. MedSend is another innovative organization I could mention here. They help pay for doctors. Doctors typically have high levels of student debt, and MedSend makes it possible for people to go as doctors by helping to pay for that cost as long as they serve as missionaries on the field. Those are all economic engine items that we could look at. All right, the next one, structure. And this has to do with alignment around your ministry. I'm sorry, somebody keeps trying to call me on a phone call here. As the ministry grows, so does complexity. The complexity requires higher and higher levels of administration and bureaucracy, and you tend to lose your agility, your focus, and your urgency around the mission that's there. Business leaders call this the paradox of growth, and let me tell you that when it comes to the church, it's on steroids. And it's on steroids because in the business world, money is a kind of a great leveler, and it forces you to innovate. We have a slow motion leveler when it comes to money because ministries tend to be able to collect funds well past the due date or the expiration date of that ministry. So when it comes to alignment around purpose, this is a very, very helpful one. Speed has a lot to do with it too, I think. We try to create urgency sometimes in the missions world, maybe not always appropriately. We use a lot of speedy language in ministry. Just so you know, we talk about things, within our generation, we're going to do this, that, by 2030. Now it's 2020's past, but I can't tell you how many organizations or ministries had, 2020 vision, and it was their thing they were going to get done by 2020. We even talk about hastening Christ's return by doing this, that, or the other thing. All of these have to do with trying to get people to feel a sense of urgency around mission, and structure is related to this. How well do you align as a church around your mission? It's a tough thing to evaluate. It takes senior leadership, I think, really to be involved in the mix. Mission statements in ministries, by the way, it's a relatively new thing. It started up in the late 70s, early 80s. But I would say you find mission statements scattered throughout the New Testament. I don't think they're unbiblical things, but they do help us try to bring some way of having alignment around our purpose. Now, why do I call alignment around our purpose structure? Because this has to do with getting all the components of your ministry moving in the direction that you want them going. One quick example from the missions world, I visited a team once in West Africa, and it was an indigenous ministry. They were all doing church planting, but they had a lot of different ministries in place to do that, including a radio station. And I visited that radio station in a building on a hill. It was a multi-story building. We walked in and we met the secretary at the desk there, and she got us, she called upstairs and got us aligned with the leader that was going to put us on a little dog and pony tour here of this radio station. And I said to her, I said, hey, as everybody was going up the stairs, I says, hey, appreciate you helping us out here. What is it you do here? Now, she was obviously the receptionist, but she said to me, well, I'm a church planter. Oh, that's kind of interesting. You're the receptionist. And she goes, yeah, but my real job is to plant churches. Well, I thought that was kind of cool. I walked upstairs. There's the sound room. They were not on the air, but the sound guy was there in this glass booth. And I walked over and I kind of opened the door and I said, hey, my name's Ted, introduced myself. And eventually I did a little experiment and I just said, hey, what is it you do here? And sure enough, he responded with, well, I'm a church planter. By day, I do sound mixing, but I'm a church planter. And everybody we asked from that point forward, even the taxi cab driver who took us to the airport, that we didn't know if he was affiliated with this ministry or not. What do you do? And he goes, well, I'm really a church planter. I just drive taxi by day to pay the bills. That's an example of alignment around mission. And what would it look like if all Christians in the U.S., in the West, basically all Christians globally, you could ask, saw themselves as church planners? That would really change our paradigms. So those are issues that have to do with structure. There's a lot more to be said on that, especially if you got into more complicated ministries that are out there. But let's head to methodology, how it is you execute on your ministry purposes. Methods have a lot to do with how we perceive the ministry. In fact, with many legacy ministries, they actually identify more with how they do their ministry than what their mission statement might be. And I don't want to call out any names, but if you were to think a little bit about some famous ministries, what comes to mind almost right away is not their mission statement, but what it is they actually, do day to day to try to bring that about. I mentioned church planting movements before, the idea of going in to plant multiple churches from day one instead of just getting one congregation started. That's an example of a change in methodology that has spurred and driven innovation. Now, you could look at innovation in methodology in your local church quite easily by looking at how you do missions and how you execute towards your goals there. Those are all methodological kinds of questions. Now, that really is the whole taxonomy. But I want to point out that one of the great ways to make this work well is to combine a couple of these on a new innovation. And some of the most successful innovations in the business world are when they combine two of these areas. So you might look at, for example, methodology and economic engine and think, how could we innovate on these two areas at the same time? And by doing that, you really bring about significant and positive change. So I am going to stop my screen share now, and we're going to see if we got any questions there. I've shared with you methodology. I've shared with you some targets that you can look at when it comes to doing innovation. And I didn't really get into the theory. I didn't get into the how. I didn't get to all that business, but hopefully it will help you think about how you can innovate in your local context. So, Matthew.
Ted, thank you, brother. Great stuff. Hey, let me start off with this. How can people get a copy of your book? Let's start right there in case they missed the announcements.
Well, obviously, you can go to the big gorilla, Amazon, type in The Innovation Crisis and order it. I don't believe they're stuck on ships off coast right now. I think you can get your hands on a copy pretty quickly. So just go to Amazon and search for The Innovation Crisis, and it will come up.
Yeah, that's right. Those dock workers are going 24/7 in Los Angeles now.
Yeah, just to fulfill orders for the innovation crisis.
That's right, man. That's right. Okay, so this is from Joyce. If a mission agency wants to create space for innovation, how much time each day or each week needs to be devoted for it in order for it to truly take root and have an impact? That's a great question.
It's a great question. I'm going to give you kind of a squirrely answer. I'd say 100%. What I mean by that is, so there's two ways that companies think about innovation. And I think in ministry, one's more powerful than the other. But companies will do one of two things. One thing they'll do is they'll try to infuse a culture of leadership everywhere in the organization. That is that 100% idea. The other way they do it is they'll have specialty innovation teams. And those teams will get called in to solve particular problems. Now, the truth is, some of the best innovating companies do both at the same time. But I would say in a ministry context, you should be thinking, if you're a senior leader, you should be thinking about it, how do we infuse innovation at all levels of the organization to create an ongoing culture of innovation? Part of it, so one of the things that's common, like Google, 20% of everybody's time can be spent on fun, innovative projects that they want to do. I think people hear that kind of thing and they think to themselves, oh man, I wish our church did that, or I wish our mission agency did that, etc. I would really prefer that leaders think in terms of whole culture change. And I mean, getting that kind of time is important. I think that's really great, but really aim for trying to be innovative all the way along. In the book, I talk about, by the way, design thinking. It is a highly pragmatic, applicable model for how to do innovation. And you can either do that in projects or you can do it in culture or both. So that'd be my answer to that.
So on that note, someone surfaced this. How do you make innovation part of your culture?
Yeah. Wow, that's a big question. Well, the first thing you do is you buy my book and you get all your pieces. I'm just kidding. You need to have discussions about it as a organization, not just one discussion, but ongoing discussions about, first of all, so there's something out there called the innovator's dilemma. The way the innovator's dilemma works is an innovator creates a new product or a new idea or a new way of doing something. And when you do that, you design the ministry around delivering that thing. Churches have been great at, for example, creating experiences for people in the culture to feel comfortable within the four walls of the church. And you can go to many churches that are doing a great job of that. But then the culture out there has shifted and it's changed. Now maybe 5,000 people in an auditorium isn't what people want in the post-COVID world. They want something very different when it comes to a church experience. But we've designed the whole model around that original innovation. It's very hard for us to try something different and new because the machine is designed around that former model. And we do that in many, many ways in ministry. And so if you really want to change your culture, what you have to do is you have to separate your mission from your method. That is just a method. How you meet is just a method to get to making disciples or whatever your church's mission statement might be. And that probably is the primary thing, is separating your methodology from your mission and then really working hard to bring about innovation on that mission piece at all levels of your ministry.
So Ted, I'm going to press on this a little bit. When you were sharing, it surfaced something in my head. The church growth movement was innovative in a lot of ways. And I know what came out of it was this seeker-sensitive model where church planners were encouraged to go into a community, evaluate the community, diagnose the community, and try and meet felt needs. Now, that led to church growth, no doubt, but some studies were done, and sadly, they drifted from the gospel message. So they weren't making disciples, they were just drawing crowds in. So how is it possible to be innovative? Times change, so methodology does need to change, but without drifting away from our gospel message and the biblical foundation that is so essential. Because when we become pragmatic, which is important, pragmatism has a place, it's easy to drift away into methods that work, but they're no longer biblical methods.
Well, again, you're hitting on that same principle of method versus mission. I would say the church growth movement, it's almost like a model for how all sorts of new things come and go. And I was on a call the other day, kind of a high profile Christian leader. Many listeners would know, who it is if I said the name. And, the point that was being made in the conversation was, hey, we don't want to serve mega churches anymore. We know that era is ending. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's really the same dynamic that you're talking about. It's the sense in the culture that, gathering 4,000 to 5,000 people together for an event is not, it's not making the impact that we want it to make. So I do think that discussion is swirling about out there that you're talking about, but the change that's going to have to be necessary is going to be painful for us to walk through to address the question of evaluation. So that's one of those taxonomy items. Are we making disciples here, or is it really seats in butts? Is that what's the most important thing to us here? Is it really about discipleship? And you'll even see some big mega churches have done some soul searching. Are we really making disciples?
Yeah.
The question is, when they get the answers to those studies, how willing are they going to be to make deep substantive change around their mission of making disciples? That's going to be the hard part. It's a great question. I don't personally see a lot of positive innovation in that area, but it's sorely needed.
I heard an illustration. It's really simple, and I don't know if it will communicate well in this context, but because it requires some nuancing. But when it comes to methodology and application, I've heard of an open hand. Times are changing, things are shifting, we need to be innovative. But when it comes to our mission and our message, it's a closed hand. So you're holding on to these ancient truths you're bringing them to bear in a, modern time, modern culture, and so it's up for grabs. But I love that methodology. I mean, that principle, because the gospel can't be innovated. It's the same message it always has been. And I think an example of this is the missional movement, Ted. We've talked about this a whole bunch, but fresh thinking, creative thinking was necessary because churches had become sequestered. They had become these country clubs. They weren't out there being salt and light. And so thus was the missional movement, and a lot of positive things came out of it. But what also was unfortunate is the priority of taking the gospel cross-culturally, namely to the unreached, got totally obscured. Everyone was a missionary suddenly. Everything done in Jesus' name was missions. So a well-intentioned idea, creative design thinking, innovative thinking was necessary, but we lost what we were trying to do.
I agree. And I think one warning in that is that, so let's say we get real smart here, we figure out what our mission is, we innovate, we produce something new. Let's not hold that new methodology so tightly. There's a little phrase that I like. It goes like this: when our methodology becomes our theology, our ecclesiology becomes a pathology.
Oh.
And what I mean by that is we infuse our understanding of how God creates and develops communities of believers. We infuse our method with the theology that's there. And that becomes the killer to how we actually should be seeing how God moves in community. And we're going to make those same mistakes in the future. So as we innovate, let's not forget that we ourselves are also subject to the innovator's dilemma. And the generation that comes next, they're going to have the same great opportunity to innovate and to take the innovations we came up with and kick them out the door. And we should be cheering them on as they do that.
I love what you said there, Ted. And I need to go to our audience. I'm taking up all the time here, but I was a part of a church movement, won't name it because I love it. I wouldn't trade anything for my time in this church movement, but the distinctives became doctrines. And so very similar to what you described, there was this methodology that was employed to reach a generation, and God blessed it. But suddenly those things that were not doctrinal issues became doctrine to the movement, and it became very dangerous.
Well, I know this isn't what you intended when you just said this, but when you said to reach a generation, well, that generation is now growing up. It's a different generation we're trying to reach.
Yep.
And so therein lies the rub, right?
That's right. So this is from Chris. All of the most innovative public companies you mentioned invest billions into new ideas, knowing that up to 90% of those ideas won't take off, but 10% could change the world. Why do you think ministries don't take more costly innovation risks or collaborate more broadly so that the financial burden doesn't fall onto one organization?
Well, I mean, if you had 3 or 4 hours, we could really unpack this one. But the whole donation system that we have, whether it's for nonprofits or for churches, is really designed around stewardship. And that means we don't take risks with money. We steward that money. And I would say that we need new systems. We don't have a great way of funding innovation. Now, at the same time, I don't think our primary problem is funding innovation as much as it is understanding what needs to be done. G.K. Chesterton had a great little quote. He said, it's not the solution they have trouble with, it's the problem they can't see. Now, that's a little bit of a paraphrase, but the real problem with innovation in ministry, I don't think it's funding. I even don't think it's time. I think it's clarity and understanding. It's understanding our day and age. It's understanding what needs to be done in the context we're living in. However, I think the question has a very true premise, and that is we are not set up well to innovate because of the model of stewardship that we have set forth. There's also the fact that, and I'm not hacking on churches or pastors by saying this, but the primary leader in a church is a pastor. He's not a leader. He's not a CEO. He's not a president. Now, I know people would say in some of the big churches they are CEOs, kind of derisively. But our primary leaders in innovation may not be the ones that are actually leading the congregations one week to the next, because there's a different skill set involved. I have here in my office somewhere a Generation 1 Kindle, and I also have the very latest Kindle that just came out. Now, the Generation 1 Kindle is a clunky little black and white device with chiclet keyboard. It's really goofy looking. And then the new one is a sleek tablet looking thing that can do everything. Which of those two is the most innovative thing? Well, the new one can do 1,000 times more, but that first one was the innovative item because it introduced a whole new way to see and do publishing. Well, the team that developed that one is very different than the team that developed the new one. This new one is an iterative innovation design process, which is a very important process. I'm not poo-pooing it at all. But this one here is even crazier because it is disruptive in how it approaches innovation. So it might be too in the church that we need to have different thinkers, different teams doing the innovation, that we can't always look to senior leaders in churches. It maybe puts a burden on them they shouldn't have.
That's good. So here's from Phil. Let's see here. Is Missio Nexus going to create a platform where people of different mission agencies can come together as mission innovators and be collaborators, or does this exist already?
Oh man, I don't know if you served that up to us as a softball question or not, but within the next couple months, we are releasing a new platform at Missio Nexus that's all based on a construct similar to Facebook. In the sense that it will be group focused. You'll be able to start groups on any topic you want and relate with others. Unlike Facebook, though, you are not the product, and so we won't be selling your information or trying to get your teenage kids to do things you don't want them to do. But it will be a collaborative platform and tool to get people trying to solve similar problems together. For example, right now, I'm part of a discussion on how we could be using blockchain technology to further the Great Commission. And we hope to see many more groups like that start. So great idea, great suggestion. Hopefully we'll be able to deliver on that shortly.
You are already being innovative. Who knew, Ted? Who knew? Okay, one more question, and then I'm going to have you give some closing comments for those who are still with us. And most everyone stayed, so we're hitting some buttons, I guess. I fear a status quo organizational culture when things are going well for the org. We are financially in good shape right now, but I see a storm coming because of the changing culture we can't avoid. Some top leadership and our board feels if it ain't broke, don't fix it. How can we influence a culture of change and innovation if our org doesn't even know or believe that it's needed? That's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. And almost every time I do a podcast or a webinar, that question comes up. So, one thing I would just say is everybody's the boss of something. And I don't care if you are working alone in an administrative area in your ministry, you're the boss of something. And everybody has opportunity to innovate in their own space. What I would suggest you consider doing is being an activist for innovation. I mean, a great Bible chapter to point people to is, remember the seven fat years followed by the 7 skinny years? You need to convince people, hey, we're in the fat years right now. Let's prepare for the fat years. What would it take? I mean, for the skinny years, what would it take for us to be ready in case everything around us changes? Now, my sense is that most legacy organizations that are in this mode, the senior leaders actually do have a sense that a lot is changing around them, and they really just don't know what should we do. And when you're stewarding a lot, when you are, when you feel that weight of burden, you don't want to risk it, and you can become risk averse pretty quick. Trust me, I've been in large organizations, and there does become the sense. In fact, in the business world, they call those large organizations that own market share, they call them incumbents. They're in that position, and their goal is to play defense and to keep they're trying to keep everybody else from knocking them off the pedestal, okay? So if you're in an incumbent organization or a stale organization, I would say the first thing to do is innovate in whatever little space that you have responsibility in. And then second, become an activist and suggest to others that, hey, we could be doing this or we could be doing that. I would suggest you get trained in design thinking. You can do that online for very cheaply. Resources abound everywhere. And then invite a couple of your colleagues and just look at the few processes that are within your control and innovate there, and you'll be noticed. And then senior leaders will maybe say, well, what are you doing there? Could that apply to other areas? And you might be surprised of the change that can come about. That's bottom up, and that can be very powerful.
So you're talking about being a leavening agent.
Yeah.
A little leaven can spoil the lump, but it can also infiltrate the lump, right?
Just a little bit of yeast goes a long way.
That's absolutely right. You know, I was reminded as you were sharing that our coaching process, really, it's helping churches be innovative in their approach to missions. Maybe they've done it a certain way for a long time. We help them to really clarify their global mission. That's the closed fist. You know, that's not up for grabs. We have a mission that was given by Jesus. We can't rethink our mission, but we can rethink how we apply our mission today. And that's what we help them do. And we talk about divine discontent. That's one of the indicators that the church is ready to move forward, is there is this frustration with status quo. And it's best when it's top down, but I also like the idea of being leaven, of getting things started and seeing what happens.
Amen.
Hey, Ted, I'm going to let you give some closing comments to our audience right now, maybe just summary thoughts or an encouragement, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Sure. I'm going to share with you an illustration out of the book that has proven to be the illustration that people want to hear. And it has to do with my neighbor, Steve. Steve is an outdoorsman, big outdoorsman, loves to go fishing, hunting, you name it. He loves all that kind of stuff. Well, he's got a deep sea fishing boat, and I live in Florida. And so he'll call me and he'll say, hey, Ted, let's go fishing. And one day we were out there, and man, it was rocking. There were 6-7 foot swells. We were both getting pretty seasick. And after about 2 hours of getting beat, he just said, hey, let's go in. That tells you it's pretty bad for him to do that. Well, on our way in, we saw this buoy in the channel bobbing up and down. And at the base of that buoy, there was a blue flash every now and then. And he realized that there was a mahi-mahi over there. And he said, hey, let's go get that thing. So we drove the boat over there. He put me on the controls of his big, huge, beautiful deep sea fishing boat. He put on this big, long orange lure, and he was standing up in the front of the boat, casting toward the buoy, and he says, Ted, get closer. And I just said, man, this is a big boat, Steve. I don't want to hit that buoy. I mean, that thing's jacking up and down, I mean, a lot, 10, 15 feet as these huge waves come and go. It's 2 stories tall, metal structure. And he says, nah, get closer, get closer. So I'd get the boat as close as I could. And when I was too close, I'd hit reverse. He'd almost fall off the front. He'd look at me and smile, and he'd say, closer, closer. And so finally, I just said, dude, I'm going to scrape the paint off your boat. And he stops and he turns around and he looks at me and he says, Ted, what is this? I said, what do you mean, what is this? He goes, what is the boat for? I said, it's for fishing. What am I doing? Well, you're fishing. Well, if the boat gets scraped in the process of fishing, it's doing its job, right? And I said, yeah, it is doing its job. And I think we forget that our ministries are created for a purpose. And innovation and risk-taking is going to require sometimes that we scrape a little paint. But it's got a purpose. Your ministry does not exist just to perpetuate itself into the future. And that all points to really understanding the mission very well. We never got to fish that day, but I got a good lesson on innovation from Steve. So those are my closing thoughts, Matthew.
It's great, Ted. Thank you so much for sharing today. It was a blessing for me. I'm sure it was for our audience as well. I want to remind everyone this webinar has been recorded. You can view it in about a week and pass it on to others. So to our audience, thanks for being here. Ted, always a pleasure, brother.
Thanks a lot, man.
Take care. Bye-bye.